Hey guys, Colleen here, and on the bench today I have a Peavey 5150. I have not done a video on one of these. Typically I service like the older Peavey amps, but I do like to work on the 5150s. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this amp. I'm sure a lot of you know it was developed with the help and influence of Eddie Van Halen. He used a 100 watt model 1959 JMP amp. And, he really loves the overdrive and the distortion. And classically, he used a variac to control the input voltage going into the amp. Apparently, he would turn all the volume levels on the amp up and then use the variac to kind of control the voltage going in, thus controlling the output. And then in the late 80s into the early 90s, he switched to a Soldano SLO 100. And then in the early 90s, Eddie Van Halen, with the help of Peavey's lead design engineer at the time, James Brown, worked to develop the 5150. If you want to know more about James Brown and like the development of the 5150, I'll link a really good interview that Tone Talk did with him in the description, and you can hear more about that from James Brown's direct perspective. So the biggest draw towards the Peavey 5150 was the insane amount of gain, saturation, and sustain that you can get from this amp without using any pedals. So this was super valuable for like hard rock, metal, and then all the subgenres of those genres of music. This is one of the earlier 5150s, and I can tell because it has the block letter logo. It says EVH in block letters. And then the company Electro Voice, EV, sent a cease and desist letter because they thought that this logo was too similar to theirs. So then after that, they switched to the Script logo, which is just Eddie Van Halen's signature. In 1994, the 5150 combo was released. And then late 90s, early 2000s, the 5152 was released. That had a few changes. And then when Eddie Van Halen left Peavey in the early 2000s, Peavey changed the name from 5150 and 5152 to the 6505 and the 6505 Plus. I'm excited to show you guys how I service these. Typically, they don't really need much besides service. Sometimes retubes. In this case, I'll just walk you guys through a deep service. Okay, so you can see this amp has Groove Tube 6L6s. Originally, they came with Sylvania 6L6s, which are awesome tubes, and then later they started using Chinese-made tubes. But these groove tubes are good. I've already tested this amp, so I know that we can leave them in. So let's take the amp out. So we can see this is a PCB amp. All right, so first I'm going to remove the preamp board, and we're going to do that by removing all of these screws. I've already removed a few. And then we're going to remove the connectors. And then we remove these screws. Okay, so this is the preamp tube board. I'm going to remove all these tubes just so I don't break any of them, and clean all the sockets, tighten them up, and I'm going to resolder a lot of these large areas. The solder actually doesn't look too bad on the sockets themselves, but I really like to resolder the connector points. And then, a lot of the time I'll just solder every point on this board just for safe measure. Now that this board has been resoldered, I am going to clean and tighten all of the tube sockets. And I know you guys have seen me do this before, but I have this little flathead screwdriver that I filed into a point, so it's easy to get in between these tube socket pins. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of these. And now that the preamp tube board has been serviced, I can install it back in and hook it all up again. Okay, so next I'm going to do virtually the same thing to the speaker board and then the effects loop jack boards. It's hard to tell, somebody may have tried resoldering this at some point, but it's a little crusty. And then we will install this back in here and clean out the jacks and the switch. It's really important to clean the impedance switch if your amp does have one, because I've seen the signal cut out if the switch is dirty or if like the solder connections are bad. So it is really important. I don't know if you guys can hear those parrots, if my mic picks them up, but here in Southern California, we do have wild parrots. They're kind of an invasive species. I don't really know the full story behind it, but yeah, we just see these wild green parrots flying around in flocks. And we're also in the midst of a heat wave right now, so I'm excited for that to be over. So we're gonna put some deoxit in that switch and then just work it a bit. All right, so you guys kind of get the deal. I slowly work my way down, removing the boards, servicing the boards, and then putting them back in. This is the effects loop jack board, and it is really important to also clean these and resolder these as well, because dirty effects return jacks specifically can cause signal cutout. And then I'm going to service the output tube board, and then I will also remove the main board resolder it, clean all the pots. This one's definitely more of a feat to remove, but it is worth the service. You guys get the gist. I'm not going to show the rest of the disassembly resoldering just because that gets a little repetitive. So once this is all serviced, I will put it back together. You know, Hank, I've got all these demos that I recorded years ago that I would love to upload. So I decided, why not try out DistroKid? As we know, DistroKid is a service that helps musicians upload their music to all major streaming platforms. Users of my channel get 30% off at the link I will post below. So go check it out, get those dusty old demos or your fresh, sparkly new tracks. Whatever it may be, get it uploaded.